since you guys have gotten a late start on the discussion this week, and I totally get it, it's been crazy with the proctored midterm and all that, I thought I'd get you started. I was going to give you some background about the early republic and the new nation. And so there's some things that you need to know about. Despite Washington's admonishments or warnings about avoiding political parties, and he did that all the way till his farewell address in 1796. He warned about avoiding political parties then even. He said that we were all Americans first, and that, and actually he was right. Parties and factionalism are detrimental to the country, and he knew that even in the 1790s. But there were factions within his cabinet almost from the very beginning, and they go back as far as Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Alexander Hamilton was from New York. He was brilliant. He was a brilliant financial mind, and Washington knew that. Washington actually aligned himself more with Hamilton than he did with Jefferson. He was not a big fan of Thomas Jefferson's at all. He did have the forethought to appoint Jefferson to the cabinet. He put him in as the Secretary of State because of Jefferson's obvious brilliance and his capabilities diplomatically. He was an amazing person. And there have actually been theories that Jefferson had what we would call Asperger's syndrome, that he was on the autism spectrum because of the quirks that he had, but also he had this extremely brilliant, outrageously brilliant mind. And they say that he was a terrible public speaker, that he was, shy, withdrawn, but he had this high-pitched, squeaky voice, but then his words are immortalized in the Declaration of Independence, the notes on the state of Virginia, the Kentucky Resolution, and all these documents that he wrote. He was a horticulturist, so to speak. He did all sorts of scientific experiments with the plants and the crops that he grew at not Mount Vernon, at Monticello. And so he had all sorts of different interests. He was very interested in so many different topics. He invented the dumb waiter, the one that goes up and down between floors, and you put it was like an elevator for your food. And so what he would do is, and you can see this at Monticello, he had a chute basically between the basement and where the kitchen was, and the floor where the dining table was. And what he did was he would have the enslaved people put the food on the bottom floor, then they would roll it up to the top floor, and it would be served. Then they put the dishes on it, and it would go back down, and they did this for each course. And what that did was it minimized the appearance of the enslaved people. And he did that with his architecture at Monticello. You can go and see that they have retaining walls that are built so that when you're looking at the front of the house, you don't see the enslaved people's quarters behind the house along the way on either side of the house, because of these retaining walls that were built up. And what they were trying to do was they were trying to avoid people seeing that there were enslaved people. They didn't want to see the people who were there that made this all happen. They just wanted it to be like magic. And so, it was like they were trying to hide the slavery, even as they benefited from it, and as they prospered from it and profited from all the enslaved labor. They didn't want it to be obvious as to how it happened. It was not supposed to be in your face. Long story. He was very, very inventive, and so he's very creative. He never got along with Jefferson. Hamilton was all about commerce, and he believed that commerce and trade were the only way to move the nation forward. You have to remember, after the Revolution, there were millions of dollars of debt to France and other countries, even Spain. They owed money, and so Hamilton knew he was much more practical than Jefferson. Jefferson was sort of the pie in the sky kind of guy. And he was more of the dreamer type. And then you had Hamilton, who was a very practical numbers guy. Both were very brilliant in very different ways. So Hamilton had been born in Jamaica to a single mom, and she had died early. Well, Hamilton's uncle came and got him and brought him back to the colonies, and that's where he was educated here. Brilliant financial mind. He knew that this debt, in order for this country to be respected and to be considered viable by the international community, he knew that he was going to have to, the debt had to be paid. If you didn't pay your debts, then how was anybody going to believe that you were a viable nation and have any respect for you at all? So he knew that had to be a thing, that had to be a priority. Also, some of the states, they had their own Revolutionary War debt. And so some of the states had already paid that back. And they paid it back early. And so you had some states that had paid it back. Some had still huge amounts of debt from the Revolution. Well, Hamilton says the government will take on that debt. Well, if the states that have already paid it back were not too happy with that, because think about it, well, we paid our debt back, but you didn't, and now the federal government's taking it off you. It's like, tit for tat there. So anyway, that becomes an issue, and you'll read about that in this in regard to this unit. So Hamilton's all about the Northeast, which is where the industry was, the shipbuilding, shipping in general, lumber, fishing, fur trades, merchants in general. So you had a lot of business going on, and they had very close ties to Great Britain, even though they had just finished a war, because Britain needed the United States, and the United States needed Britain for trade purposes. So Hamilton's all about the manufacturing and business. Jefferson, on the other hand, is all about an agrarian utopia. He wanted this, his vision for this country was that it would be small or yeoman farmers. Yeoman is spelled Y-E-O-M-A-N, and it's just a term for small farmer. He wanted to avoid industry and manufacturing, but what's interesting is that he wanted all these guys to be small farmers, but Jefferson himself was a wealthy planter, and he was not a yeoman farmer. So what is it? How is it that there's supposed to be, what he was saying didn't align to what he actually was? And so he's got this paradox where it's one thing for everybody else. Everybody else needs to be a small farmer who's not rich. And then, oh wait, but Thomas Jefferson is a wealthy planter, and he makes money hand over fist, and he, over a period of a lifetime, he owned over 600 enslaved people. So he inherited them from, that's another story I'll have to tell you about. He inherited enslaved people, and he had his own too. So that is an issue. So there's a paradox there. So these parties form early, and Hamilton was a part of the Federalist, and they wanted the strong central government. They wanted, government oversight. And then you had Jefferson and the anti-federalist, also called Democratic Republicans, and they had the states' rights platform with a weak central government. They were all about states' rights. And so that's the explanation for where you're starting with this unit. and this is what's going on in the 1790s. So I hope that helps you with getting started on this discussion, and thanks so much for watching.